Before we start looking at problem solving in geometry, let's remember some formulas that we'll be using and things you need to memorize. So memorization is one of those things that you need to do from time to time, and it's a good practice. The first thing to do in memorizing is to recognize the formula. So sometimes we look at the book, you say, oh yes, I know that formula, and you think you have it memorized. But the key to memorization is step 2 here, where it says, if given a sketch, for instance, if I gave you a sketch like this, some sort of rectangle, and said, all right, what's the area? Oh, well, maybe if I saw the formula I'd remember it. Now I'm not so sure. All right, so I haven't really memorized it until I can take a sketch, label it, and write the formula without looking at my notes, without looking at the book. So let's go through today those things that I expect you to memorize. I have 3 shapes, a rectangle, a triangle, and a circle. The triangle looks a little funny right now, but we'll see why I have it this way. There are actually 2 triangles here, but let's start with a rectangle. There are 2 things we can do with a rectangle. We can look at its perimeter, and we can look at its area. So the perimeter, that's basically as if I was going to put a fence around this rectangle, right? And I'd say, okay, well, how much fencing would I need? Let's label this rectangle. Let's call this the width, W, and the length, L. So I have 2 dimensions, a length, this amount, and the width going from here to here, or sometimes you can think of it. So that's the first step, labeling the shape. Now once I have that, we can say, all right, well, if I were to start, say, at this location, we'll call it X marks the start right here, and I were to walk around this rectangle, just go for a leisurely walk, I'd say, well, how far would I go? And I'd go all the way around. So that would be what we call the perimeter, or P, capital P, and I would have W, and then I'd walk a distance L, and then I'd have to come back up, and I'd go a distance W again, and another distance L. So just reasoning it out gives me the formula P equals 2. Notice there are 2 W's. I'll combine like terms, plus 2L. So it hands me the equation for perimeter. Let's see if I can put a box around that. All right? Pretty simple, really, if you just kind of reason out what's going on. The other thing we can do with a rectangle is look at the area. I'm going to be tiling a kitchen soon, and I need to figure out the square footage of the floor. This is something I just did yesterday, actually. And to do that, I need to know the width and the length. And once I have that, I just multiply the 2 together. So that's the area. Now notice the units on this. These are all lengths and perimeter, so say it's feet, it would be feet, so many feet. But area is feet times feet, or square feet, right? Now I could use meters, inches, whatever unit of length. All right, so these are 2 formulas that you should recognize, but also be able to take a rectangle of your own, label it, and figure out the perimeter and area. That's something you should memorize. Let's look at a triangle. Again, this is something that you should memorize. Now, I've put here a rectangle to try and get you to remember this a little bit, but if I were to say, I'm going to try and make a dotted line right down the center of this rectangle, I would have a nice little triangle sitting here, right? This is a triangle. So let me move this triangle right here. We'll look at this one. Right? I've got that nice little triangle. I'll move it over here. right? And we'll do the same thing we did with the rectangle. Let's label it. Well, we could call this W, but let's call it B for base, the base of the triangle, the thing it's sitting on, right? If I were to put this triangle on one of these little points, it would fall over, but on the base it sits there nicely. Let's call this its height, H. All right, we're not going to be too worried about the slanted side at this point. For a triangle, the formula I want you to remember is for area. Well, what's the area of this rectangle? Well, let's go back to this rectangle. I called this base B. That's the width of the rectangle. I'm just giving it a different name. And the height, or the length, was above it was L, and this time we're calling it H. So the area of the rectangle was B times H. But we cut it in half, right? We cut it in half to make it a triangle. So the area now is 1/2 the base times the height. And that is always true for any triangle. So now we have the area of a triangle. We're not going to worry in this course about the perimeter right now of a triangle. But this is another formula you need to memorize. However, it's easy to memorize. It's just half a rectangle. It turns out no matter what shape the triangle is, let me give you another triangle here if I can. Let's say I have that as a triangle. The thing to remember is here's the base going across that distance. Now the key here is where's the height? The height is actually, you can think of it like the altitude or the elevation of a mountain or something like that. The height is this distance right here. It's the perpendicular distance from the base. So this distance is height, always on a triangle. All right, and then the last one is a circle. Well, the circle has a center, and then out from that center, the way a circle is made is we just have, if I could make it here, we have a constant distance. It comes out here, and we call it a radius, and I'll give it a label R. The perimeter of a circle has its own name. It's called circumference. Excuse me, but it is the perimeter of a circle. So the circumference, and I'm not going to derive this for you, but we'll just remember it, is 2 pi r. This is where that number pi comes in. And the area of a circle is equal to pi r squared. How to remember these? I remember them by use of the units. R is a distance, right? Is a distance. So maybe it's, for example, inches. So in my first 2 pi, in my first equation, 2 pi is just a constant. It's just a number times inches. So the units on the circumference would be inches, which is very similar to the perimeter of a rectangle, which was inches or feet, or, right? And area, the pi r squared, sometimes people remember it, no pi r round. Okay, it's not a great joke, but it's a joke nonetheless. Pi r squared, well, the r is squared, so that would be r, that would be r squared is equal to r times r, which would give me what? Square inches or square feet or whatever the unit was. So remember, square feet has to do with area. Right, so the r squared, pi r squared is area, 2 pi r is circumference. We have two more equations to look at, and they have to do with volume. So perhaps the item on the left is, say, a milk carton of sorts, or a juice container. The item on the right is what Quaker Oats used to come in, or something like that. It's what we call a right circular cylinder. Here we have a square type cylinder, or a rectangular base. What's the difference, by the way, now that I mentioned square, between a square and a rectangle? Well, let's just quickly look at that. I have a square, W and L. Oh, they're the same, so I could just call it W and W, right? What's the area of a square? Well, it's just W times W, or W squared. Oh, it's the same as a rectangle. It's just I really have nothing new to remember. That's cool. Alright, so let's look at the base of these particular volumes. This base, it's sitting on a square or a rectangular, I'm going to call it rectangular base, right? If I put a carton of milk on the counter, hopefully I put it down right on its base. If it's a circular base, right, when I put it down on the counter, it's going to sit here like that. So one has a rectangular base, one has a circular base. And then both of them have a certain height. We'll call it h. Right? They both have a height h. So volume becomes really simple. Volume, V, for either of these shapes, is the area of the base. I'm going to put a subscript base. It's the area of the base times the height. Well, we already know the area of the bases. If I take a look at the left, the one on the left, if this is W and this is L, what's the area of this base? Well, the volume over here would be, the area of the base would be WL, and I'd multiply that by H. Well, that's almost too simple. Let's look at the right-hand side. That has to be harder, right? V equals, so V for volume, what's the area of this base? Well, it's circular, so it has a center and a radius. The area of a circle, pi r squared, and times h. Wow. Once we know the area of a circle or the area of a rectangle, we can find the volume of these. What about a prism? Let's say it has a triangular base. Can you figure out the volume of that? Correct. The area of the base, 1/2 B. Oh, this time I used H, right? So let's rename this. Let's call it A. We'll call that A, because we said this little piece on the triangle was H, right? So we don't want to use the same one. Pretty simple, huh? So these you need to memorize.